In 1985, Michael Jackson vanished for 7 hours. No cameras, no security logs, no official explanation. What happened during that time will haunt him for the rest of his life. And the truth was buried so deeply that even his closest collaborators were never told the full story until now. Because what Michael Jackson experienced that night was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. And it was not something the world was supposed to know. Michael Jackson was kidnapped, and the man who saved him would carry the secret to his grave. So why was the truth never revealed? Who wanted the story erased? And what did Michael whisper in fear when he finally escaped? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. Los Angeles, 1985. The city glowed beneath a silver moon, but inside Michael Jackson's black limousine, everything felt wrong. He had just finished a private studio session in West Hollywood. One of those nights where music poured from his soul, but exhaustion weighed on his bones. Thriller had turned him into the most famous human being on the planet. Yet inside the car, he felt painfully alone. His driver, Frank, noticed Michael's silence. "Long night, Mike?" he asked gently. Michael forced a small smile. "Music never sleeps, Frank." The route home was familiar. Same streets, same turns, same quiet comfort of routine. Until it wasn't. At exactly 11:42 p.m., the limousine slowed unexpectedly. 3 black SUVs appeared from nowhere. They boxed him in. Frank slammed the brakes. Michael's heart stopped. One of the SUVs flashed a police-style light. A man in a dark jacket approached the driver's window and spoke calmly. "Federal security check. Step out of the vehicle." Frank hesitated. This wasn't procedure. Something felt off. Before he could react, 2 men were already at Michael's door. "Mr. Jackson, we need you to come with us." Michael froze. I don't understand," he whispered. One of the men leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "Michael, if you scream, this ends badly." The world-famous superstar, the man adored by millions, felt something he hadn't felt since childhood. Pure, paralyzing fear. His mind raced. Was this real? Was this a prank? Or something far more dangerous? Frank tried to intervene. "You don't have authorization." The man turned cold. "Walk away." Frank would later admit those 2 words terrified him more than any weapon. Michael was guided into the back of one of the SUVs. The door slammed. The convoy drove off. And for the next 7 hours, Michael Jackson simply disappeared. No calls. No witnesses. No explanation. Inside the vehicle, Michael clutched his gloves, his breathing shallow. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. No answer. They drove in silence, the city lights fading behind them. He thought of his mother, his brothers, the stage lights, the screaming fans. Was this how it ended? The SUV finally stopped at a remote industrial warehouse on the edge of the city. As the door opened, one of the men whispered something that would stay with Michael forever. "Michael, this is bigger than you." And as he stepped inside the dark building, he had no idea that his life, and his understanding of trust, was about to change forever. The warehouse smelled of cold metal and old dust. Michael felt at the moment he stepped inside the heavy silence of a place that had not been meant for music, laughter, or life. Only secrets. The men led him through a narrow corridor lit by a single flickering bulb. The sound of his own footsteps echoed like a heartbeat he could not control. "Where are you taking me?" Michael asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Still no answer. They reached a steel door. It opened slowly, revealing a large empty room with only 1 table, 3 chairs, and a dim light hanging from the ceiling. The shadows stretched across the walls like they were alive. "Sit," one of the men said. Michael obeyed. For the first time since leaving the limousine, he truly felt how alone he was. No bodyguards, no assistants, no stage, no fans, just him and 3 strangers who clearly were not who they claimed to be. The man who seemed to be in charge finally spoke. "Michael Jackson, you're the most influential human being on earth right now." Michael's eyes lowered. "I just make music." The man smiled, but it was empty. No, you move culture. You change minds. And that makes you dangerous. Michael's chest tightened. Why am I here? The man leaned forward. Because certain people are worried about where your influence is going. Michael's mind raced. His humanitarian work. His messages about children, peace, race, unity. His refusal to play political games. What people? Michael asked. The man shook his head. You don't need to know that. You only need to understand this. Your voice reaches places power cannot. Michael swallowed hard. Are you threatening me? The room went silent. Finally, the man said quietly, We are reminding you. They slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs. Michael recognized them instantly, his home, his family, his private studio sessions, his private phone calls. Some of the images were taken from angles that made his stomach turn. How did you get these? He whispered. The man tapped the folder. You are never alone, Michael. That's the cost of being untouchable. Tears burned behind his eyes. He had always felt watched, followed, but seeing proof of it shattered something inside him. What do you want? He asked. The man stood. For now, nothing. This meeting is about awareness. Michael looked up, confused. And why take me like this? The man's expression hardened. Because you needn't be afraid. The words hit him like ice water. They stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, the man turned back. One day you may be asked to choose between your message and your safety. The door closed. Michael was left alone. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. He couldn't tell. His thoughts spiraled. His mother, his childhood, his brothers, the stage, the screaming crowds. How could the world adore him so fiercely? And yet this exists behind it. Finally, the door opened again. A different man entered. Older, softer eyes, not like the others. Michael, he said quietly, I'm going to take you home. Michael stood so fast the chair fell backward. Who are you? He asked. The man hesitated, then spoke. Someone who believes this should never have happened. They walked out together, the night air crashing over Michael's skin like a blessing. On the drive back, the man kept his eyes on the road. You will never speak of this, he said gently. Michael's hands trembled in his lap. Why? Because if you do, the next time, you won't come back. Michael stared out the window at the city he loved, the city that had almost swallowed him. They dropped him 2 blocks from his home. No one can know I was involved, the man said before leaving. Michael nodded. When he finally entered his house, the walls felt unfamiliar. His own bed felt unsafe. He sat on the floor of his bedroom and cried, quietly, the way he had learned as a child. The next morning, his team noticed something had changed. Michael was quieter, more distant. He avoided phone calls. He canceled meetings. He refused to leave the house for days. When his mother asked what was wrong, he simply hugged her and said, I'm just tired. But he was not tired. He was afraid. From that night forward, Michael's trust in the world fractured. He became more protective, more isolated, more guarded. Fame no longer felt magical. It felt dangerous. Yet, despite everything, he kept performing, kept creating, kept giving the world joy while carrying this terror alone. And somewhere deep inside him, one question never stopped echoing. Why me? Years passed. From the outside, Michael Jackson became even bigger than before. Sold-out stadiums, global tours, legendary albums, thunderous applause that shook the earth. But inside, the man who smiled on stage carried a quiet, invisible fracture that never fully healed. He trusted fewer people. He slept with the lights on. He memorized the sound of every door in his house. And he never spoke about that night. Not to his brothers. Not to his mother. Not to the lawyers, managers, or bodyguards who surrounded him every day. Until one evening in 1989, during the early planning sessions for the Dangerous Era, when the silence inside him finally became too heavy to carry alone. They were in a private studio outside Santa Barbara, far from the noise of Los Angeles, far from press, far from everything. Only Michael and one of the few people he trusted without question, his longtime collaborator and friend, Daniel. The music had stopped. The room was dim, warm with the smell of wood and tape machines. Michael sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. Daniel noticed his hands. They were shaking. "Mike, what's going on?" Michael didn't answer at first. His throat tightened. He pressed his palms together, then slowly looked up. "Have you ever been so afraid," he said quietly, "that it feels like your heart is never completely calm again?" Daniel sat down beside him. "Yes," he said, "but I've never seen that in you." Michael's eyes filled. "There's something I never told anyone." Daniel waited. He didn't rush him. Michael closed his eyes, and then the story began to pour out. The SUVs, the warehouse, the photographs, the voice that told him he was being watched, the man who drove him home and vanished into the night. When Michael finished, the room was so silent that even the hum of the machines felt loud. Daniel stared at him, stunned. "Michael, that's—" He stopped. He didn't know the word for it. Michael's voice cracked. "I've lived with it alone for years." Daniel leaned forward. "Why tell me now?" Michael swallowed. "Because I'm tired of being strong." The words were small, but they carried decades of weight. Daniel reached for his hand. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in years, Michael believed someone. They sat there for a long time, the past finally having a witness. From that night forward, Daniel became something different. Not just a collaborator, not just a friend, but a guardian of a secret that was bigger than both of them. But secrets, like storms, have a way of shifting. Months later, during a tour stop overseas, Michael collapsed in his hotel room from exhaustion and dehydration. The doctors were called. His team rushed in. Panic filled the hallway. And in the chaos, Daniel overheard something that made his blood turn cold. Two men from the local security detail were whispering in the corner. "That's him," one said. "Who?" the other asked. "The one they took years ago. He's still on the list." Daniel froze. The words echoed exactly like the language Michael had described from the warehouse. That night, Daniel barely slept. The next morning, he pulled Michael aside. "Mike," he whispered, "we are not safe." Michael's face drained of color. "What do you mean?" Daniel told him what he heard. Michael's breath hitched. His chest tightened. The room tilted. "They're still watching me," he whispered. Daniel nodded. "And now they know I know." From that moment on, the world around them felt different. Every hotel corridor, every car ride, every phone call. Michael returned to the stage each night and performed like a legend, while behind the curtains his heart pounded with fear he could not explain to anyone else. One evening after a show, he looked at Daniel and said softly, "I don't want to disappear again." Daniel promised him, "You won't." But the shadow had already begun to move. And far away, in places Michael would never see, old conversations were being reopened. About influence, about control, about the man whose voice could reach millions. By the early 1990s, Michael Jackson had reached a level of fame that no human being was ever meant to carry. The Dangerous World Tour was in full motion. Stadiums trembled. Cities shut down. The world sang his name. But behind the stage lights, something dark was unfolding. Daniel could feel it. The glances in hotel lobbies that lasted too long. The unfamiliar cars that appeared again and again. The strange phone clicks that happened before calls connected. One night in Munich, Daniel found a note slid under his hotel door. No signature. Only 5 words written in black ink. "Some stories are better buried." His stomach dropped. He rushed to Michael's suite. Michael was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his gloved hands. "They're still here," Michael said before Daniel could speak. "I can feel them." Daniel showed him the note. Michael's breath caught. "They want us silent," he whispered. The pressure intensified with every passing city. Michael began suffering from insomnia. He would wander hotel hallways at 3 a.m., barefoot, humming to himself just to stay calm. Some nights he would sit on the floor and tell Daniel stories from childhood, as if holding on to anything that still felt safe. One evening in Buenos Aires, Michael finally broke. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "I give the world love. Why does it feel like love is the most dangerous thing to give?" Daniel had no answer. The tour continued. And then the headlines exploded. Accusations. Lies. Whispers that spread like wildfire. Michael stood in front of his television in absolute shock as the news anchors spoke his name with a tone he had never heard before, cold, distant, condemning. "What is happening to me?" he whispered. The storm was bigger than both of them. Lawyers, publicists, advisors swarmed the hotel. Phones rang nonstop. The world that once adored him now looked at him with suspicion. And through it all, Michael kept performing. On stage, he was untouchable. Off stage, he was breaking. One night after a show in Sao Paulo, Michael collapsed backstage, sobbing in Daniel's arms. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he cried. Daniel held him, feeling the truth burn in his chest. Someone had finally decided it was time to dismantle the most powerful voice on earth. Weeks later, Daniel received a message that changed everything. A former security contractor requested a private meeting. No phones, no witnesses. They met at a cafe in Madrid. Seated far from the windows, the man's hands trembled. "You don't know me," he said, "but I was part of something years ago, something involving your friend." Daniel's heart pounded. "The warehouse," the man whispered. Daniel froze. "They never meant to hurt him physically," the man continued. "They meant to frighten him, to make him easier to control. But now they've lost control of the story." "Who is they?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head. "If I say their names, I disappear." Daniel leaned in. "Why tell me?" The man's eyes filled. "Because Michael is being crushed and I helped start it." Before Daniel could ask anything else, the man stood and walked away into the crowd, leaving Daniel with a truth he could barely process. That night, Daniel told Michael everything. Michael sat perfectly still, as if his body had turned to glass. "So it wasn't in my head," he whispered. "No," Daniel said. "It never was." Michael pressed his hands over his face. "They scared me, so I would be easier to break." Daniel nodded. "And now the world is helping them." The realization shattered something inside Michael. From that moment on, the accusations, the headlines, the isolation, they all connected into one unbearable picture. Yet even then, Michael refused to become bitter. "I won't stop loving people," he said through tears. "They can't take that from me." But the weight was changing him. His voice grew softer. His eyes grew sadder. His laughter became rare. And somewhere deep in the machinery of fame and power, the same unseen forces were moving again. Closer this time, bolder, convinced that Michael Jackson was finally vulnerable. By 1994, the storm surrounding Michael Jackson had become impossible to escape. The world spoke his name every day. But no one was listening to his heart. Inside Neverland, the laughter of children still echoed across the fields. But Michael often sat alone on the balcony of the main house at night, staring at the stars as if they were the only witnesses he trusted. Daniel joined him one evening, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You haven't slept," Daniel said softly. Michael didn't turn. "I dream about the warehouse," he whispered. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm back there. I can smell the dust. I can hear the door closing." Daniel sat beside him. "It wasn't your fault." Michael shook his head. "I should have fought harder. I should have screamed. I should have done something." "You survived," Daniel said. "That's what matters." Michael's eyes filled. But surviving isn't the same as living. The pressure reached a breaking point during a private meeting with his legal team in Los Angeles. The accusations were everywhere. Sponsors were nervous. Advisors were panicking. One lawyer leaned forward. "Michael, the narrative is collapsing. You need to convince the public that you are in control." Michael stared at the table. "In control of what?" he whispered. "Of your image, of the story, of your life." Michael stood up suddenly. "My life is not a story." Silence fell over the room. That night, Michael called Daniel. "I'm ready," he said. "Ready for what?" "To tell the truth." They met in a small guest house on the edge of Neverland, far from staff and cameras. Only 2 people, 1 lamp, the truth between them. Michael paced the floor. "I've been quiet because I was afraid. Afraid they would come again. Afraid they would hurt the people I love. Daniel listened. But I can't live like this anymore. He stopped pacing. There's something I never told you. Daniel looked up. About the night I disappeared, they gave me something. Daniel's breath caught. What? Michael reached into a small wooden box he kept hidden in his jacket pocket. Inside was a thin metallic object no bigger than a coin. They pressed this into my palm before I left, Michael said. They told me it was a reminder. Daniel stared at it. What does it do? Michael shook his head. I don't know, but whenever things get worse, I feel like they're closer. Daniel's mind raced. You kept this for 9 years? Michael nodded. I didn't trust anyone with it. Until now. Daniel took a careful breath. Michael, this changes everything. Michael finally looked at him. I don't want to be afraid anymore. The next morning, Michael made a decision that stunned his entire team. He would sit down for a private recorded interview. Not for the media, not for the public, but for himself. A personal archive. A confession. Only 3 people would ever hear it. Michael, Daniel, and a lock safe. In the recording, Michael spoke for nearly 2 hours. About the warehouse. About the men. About the threats. About the fear that followed him for a decade. When it ended, his voice was hoarse. His face pale. Daniel sealed the recording and locked it away. Why do this now? Daniel asked. Michael's answer was simple. Because someday the truth will matter more than my fear. Weeks later, the pressure from the outside world intensified. New accusations, new headlines, new betrayals. Michael withdrew further. One afternoon, as they walked across the grounds of Neverland, Michael stopped near the lake. I don't know how much longer my heart can take this, he whispered. Daniel felt a chill. Michael, I'm not giving up, he said quickly. I'm just tired of fighting alone. Daniel promised him he never would again, but fate was already turning. Late one night, Daniel's hotel room phone rang. A distorted voice spoke only one sentence. Return the reminder or the story ends badly. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the receiver, his blood turning cold. They knew about the object. They knew about the recording. And now they were moving again. Daniel did not tell Michael about the phone call immediately. He carried it in his chest like a loaded weapon, unsure whether revealing it would protect Michael or break him. For 2 days, Michael sensed something was wrong. He became quieter than usual, wandering through Neverland with a distant look, touching the bark of trees, standing near the animals as if grounding himself in something real. On the 3rd night, Michael found Daniel sitting alone in the recording room, staring at the sealed box that contained his confession. They called you, didn't they? Michael said. Daniel looked up, stunned. How did you? Michael offered a sad smile. When you live in fear long enough, you learn to hear it in the air. Daniel told him everything. Michael listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, the room felt impossibly small. They want the object, Michael said quietly. And the recording, Daniel replied. Michael nodded. I expected this. Daniel's heart sank. You did. Michael stood and walked to the window. The night they took me, they told me that silence would protect me, but silence only made me smaller. He turned back to Daniel. I don't want to hide anymore. They made the decision together. The next morning, Michael instructed his legal team to move the recording into a safety deposit vault under a name that only Daniel and one trusted attorney knew. The object was placed in a separate location, guarded, sealed, unreachable. Michael felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Relief. But it did not last. The pressure outside his gates grew louder. Letters. Threats disguised as advice. Strangers calling his home and hanging up. Shadows that lingered at the edges of his life. Michael's body began to show the cost. He lost weight. His hands trembled. His sleep became fractured and thin. One night, Michael collapsed in the hallway of Neverland. The doctor said it was exhaustion and dehydration, but Daniel knew better. It was the weight of too many years of fear. Michael recovered slowly. As he lay in bed, pale and silent, he whispered to Daniel, "Promise me something. Anything. If they come for me again, don't let me disappear." Daniel gripped his hand. I won't. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a black envelope arrived with no return address. Inside, only a photograph. It showed Daniel leaving the bank. They were watching. Michael's breath caught when he saw it. They know, he whispered. Daniel's voice hardened. Then we stopped running. Michael looked at him. How? Daniel hesitated, then said, We tell one more person. Michael shook his head. No, I trusted you because you are quiet, because you protect me. Daniel met his eyes. This is bigger than both of us now. They flew to New York under false names. A private meeting was arranged with an investigative journalist who had built a career exposing power without destroying the innocent. Michael sat across from her in a small hotel room. I don't want fame from this, he said. I don't want revenge. I only want the truth to exist somewhere outside my body. She listened for hours. When Michael finished, she said, Do you understand what this could do? Michael nodded. It already has. They left without knowing if anything would ever come of it. On the flight back, Michael watched the clouds pass beneath him and whispered, For the first time, I feel lighter. But the storm was not done. 2 days later, Daniel was followed from the studio. The same black SUV from years ago appeared at the end of the street, just long enough for him to see the reflection of himself in the tinted window. A message arrived that night. Final warning. Michael read it and felt something change inside him. No fear, only resolve. I won't be owned, he said. I won't be erased. The next morning, Michael went outside before sunrise. He walked alone to the empty fields of Neverland, dew on the grass, birds just beginning to sing. He thought of the boy he had been, the man he had become, the night in the warehouse, the years of silence. When Daniel found him, Michael said, They tried to take my voice that night, but they failed, because I still love, and as long as I love, I am free. Daniel felt tears rise. You're stronger than they ever imagined. Michael smiled. I had to become that. But far beyond the hills of Neverland, someone else was watching and preparing to make their final move.